This is a funny excerpt to the story. So he's arguing with me about the appraisal. So I call back the lender because he's saying when he talked to the appraiser that the house would have been appraised at 535 before any of the work was done. And I'm like, what? Well, that's different. So let me do some legwork. So we call the lender who calls the appraiser, and that appraiser said he was the one that did that original appraiser for the seller. He did it.
Oh,
And he said that I was sitting with this man at his kitchen table and I told him the value would be 510 after the work was done. I have no idea where he got 535 before work was done. I said 510 after. He's lucky I gave him 535. So, and I immediately called the listing agent back and I was like, by the way, the appraiser's the same one that you talked to at your kitchen table. And when I say he just immediately agreed to the 535, he's like, listen, I'll do 535, but can she come in with her own closing costs?
welcome to a series of unfortunate real estate events, a podcast where we talk about real issues that come up between the time a property goes under contract to the time it actually closes, and what professionals can learn from them. This week, I'm joined by Ariel Aderi from My Good Agent, and we're walking through actually two deals that didn't go to plan and ultimately how they worked out. Let's start by letting you to tell us a little bit about ourselves. Wow. Starting by letting you us a little bit about you.
Awesome.
So tell
Well,
me, how long have you been an agent?
all right. So I've been a real estate agent. Technically, I got licensed in 2020, but I've been practicing since 2021. And we are in 2026 right now. So I'd say about 5 years at this point. But prior to becoming a real estate agent, I was in banking and finance for 8.5 years, where I worked at Wells Fargo for about 4.5 years and KeyBank Key Investment Services for another 4 years, where I pretty much did everything in the bank that you could think of, from being a teller all the way up to being a financial advisor, where I did about 6 years where I also practiced in mortgages and did home equity loans, lines. I was an MLO, did the whole nine, all the fun stuff.
Perfect.
So it was a pretty easy crossover to get into real estate from banking.
And that means you understand the process better than most, which is key. So you know some of the speed bumps to avoid or to help with during the financing process.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like that's been invaluable in my growth in my career.
And one of the things that we've done a number of times, and I'm going to highlight, is that Ariel and I have done a number of homebuyer workshops. Education is extremely important to her, both learning yourself and teaching your clients and other members of the public. So I'm going to ask, what got you into real estate from banking? Seems like it's an easy transition over, but what got you there?
So I'm sorry, I didn't quite hear the question. Can you repeat it one more time, please?
What got you into real estate from the banking world?
Got it. So it's a very interesting story. So the last bank that I was at was KeyBank Key Investment Services. They were actually the bank that was servicing all of the unemployment cards during COVID. So pretty much as an essential employee, still had to show up to work every single day. And I couldn't even do my job because all I was doing was, servicing all of the unemployment cards. And our line in a drive-through would be wrapped around the building. But I still worked with the private bank, and I had a client that was a real estate broker that I met for our semi-annuals. And since obviously it was an important client during COVID, we made the exception. We let him into the office. I had my semi-annual with him. And as always, he always poached me to start working with him.
Yeah.
And he said, you'd be a great agent. You should work with me. Da, 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 da. And every time I would respectfully decline, I like my job, whatever. During that time in the bank specifically, I wasn't even really able to do my job. I didn't really like the way the bank was approaching like everything during COVID. And I was also on something called a branch manager bench, where the leadership said that if they're ever going to be promoting, they have all the talent from within, they want to empower from within, and we will only be promoting within this branch manager bench, which I was on to be a licensed branch manager with 4 other people. So there were 5 of us on the bench. During that time, they actually transferred the branch manager that I had, who I was very close to, and moved him to another office, and they hired externally, and which is exactly what they said they wouldn't do. And then because it was COVID, all the training sites were down, and they asked me to train her. So
That's awful.
I mean, it's all good, right? Because that
Yeah.
just happened the day before the meeting with this client. And he did his regular poaching of saying, I think you'd be a great agent. You should come and work with me. And I let him know. I was like, tell you what, you sponsor me, you pay all my startup costs and get me started. I'll commit to you for a year. And he was like, that's it. I'm like, that's it. And he's like, all right, consider it done. However, I will sponsor you. I will pay all of your startup costs, but I will do it as a reimbursement. You have to give the initial investment. You have to pay for your classes, pay for your license, pay for all of your dues, and then I will reimburse you on the back end because you need to have your own skin in the game. I'm like, yeah, whatever, fair. I mean, I'm not gonna not do anything I say I'm gonna do. So deal. Shook on it, and I started studying for my real estate license. By December of 2020, day after my birthday, because it was December 8th, my birthday is December 7th, I got my license. And I pretty much got it in Massachusetts, got my Connecticut reciprocal because Massachusetts had all online and it was COVID. And then what wound up happening was I went back to the bank. I basically told on myself because I wasn't supposed, not that I wasn't supposed to get my real estate license, because I had my securities licenses, I needed to fill out something called an OBA, an outside business activity report, where I'm essentially asking for permission to do an outside business activity, which I didn't do because I was planning on leaving the bank anyway. So I kind of got found out because I sent myself an email that was labeled Massachusetts real estate exam. And
Yeah, that would do
yeah,
it.
that'll do it. So HR called me. I did the whole nine. Like I told them, yes, I'm studying for it, blah, blah, blah. And then I just hurried up and resigned before, I was terminated or anything. It was a long weekend, MLK Day weekend. It was in January of 2021. And then when I came back for the weekend, I was expecting to be walked out because in banking, once you put in your notice, they don't actually let you work it. It's really just more of a formality and you fill up your banker box and you walk out. So I was expecting to be walked out. But instead, I was called by the regional retail leader and basically telling me, like, it sounds like there was a big misunderstanding with our last conversation with HR. Your job is safe, it's secure. You just got to get rid of that pesky little real estate license and, we're good. And I'm like, well, thank you, for the vote of confidence. But, I did take this long weekend to think about everything. And I really do believe in myself and I want to give real estate a shot. But, I would be happy to stay and assist in the transition because also at this point, I didn't really want to quit my job because I didn't have
Right.
any other source of income yet. And he was like, listen, that's kind of not how this works. But is there a number that you're looking for, a position that we can give you that could potentially retain you? Just name it and we'll give it to you. And obviously in my mind, I'm like, well, that's very interesting considering you literally just passed up on me for this management position and now you're offering me whatever I want. That's weird, but whatever, neither here nor there. Respectfully declined, but still position that I'm willing to stay until the end of February to assist in the crossover. And they actually wound up getting special permission for me to stay for that extra month and a half to assist in the crossover and still remain employed during that time, which was also lucky because I specifically wanted to stay until the end of February so I can get my Q4 bonus from the prior year, which I was able to get. I had about like $20,000 saved for my crossover into real estate where I figured this is good. I can still cover my bills while I get my feet wet and figure everything out. And then by March of 2021, I got a letter from my homeowners insurance company saying I needed to rebuild my deck and re-side my house by May. Otherwise, they were dropping me.
Oh,
So that zapped $17,000 of my $20,000 saving. And it was really a sink or swim moment. It got kind of scary at that point. I picked up side work bartending. I figured it all out. And I actually did my first home buyer seminar in the beginning of May and got my first client that closed by July. And needless to say, it was a very interesting journey from there to here.
yeah, it sounds like it. That sounds like an adventure. I'm
Oh,
thinking, I don't know why I'm thinking about this, but I'm thinking like, I think it's Magellan that when they landed in Florida, he set his ships on fire. Kind of what I feel like you did. You set everything on fire and said, I'm doing this. I'm going all in. Doesn't matter if it works or fails. I'm trying it. And, being that you're here 5 years later, sounds like it's been working out pretty well.
yeah, I mean, it was definitely a baptism by fire, especially considering by week 2, me and my broker were already bumping heads. And I pretty much told him, I'm like, tell you what, you sponsored me. It's all good. I'm stuck with you for a year. Don't talk to me. I won't ask you any questions unless it's absolutely necessary. I will figure it all out on my own. 100%. And he pretty much told me you'll fail. So whatever, it's up to you. I'm like, great. And then
Yeah.
I sold 41 houses that first year from April to December.
Oh, that's impressive. I knew you did a lot. I know you do a lot of closing. I didn't realize it was that many and that quickly. So you got probably stories upon stories, but I'm going to kind of guide you through a few that I've been involved with that I think are really common stories that come up and could be
Mhm.
very beneficial to our clients as well as other real estate agents to learn something from. So I'm going to kind of guide you through one that we just recently closed and let you give us some background. So let's start with, how long had you been working with this client prior to finding the house that she ultimately bought?
So I was working with this client with my partner, Oscar, and the two of us were working with her together. And he actually was nurturing her the most for about 8 months. And
Okay.
then when she was finally ready, about 8 months later, he looped me into the conversation because he's like, okay, now that she's ready, let's get the big guns in. So
Yeah.
at that point, I got involved, assisted with making sure that all of the numbers were nice and updated. It was a pretty special situation because she needed all of her closing costs covered, which is pretty common with a lot of clients. However, not the easiest in this present market, especially when you're looking for multifamily properties with all of these investors out here that are trying to find a good one and are willing to pay a premium. So,
Right.
yes, she was willing to pay a premium, but as we all know, once you start asking for credits, they're needed. So in this particular house, I'm going to run through the numbers. It was originally listed, I believe, at 515. We offered 575 with 4% of the purchase price back for closing costs and prepaid items. So it sounds like a big number at that 575, but realistically speaking, we were asking for over $20,000 back for closing costs, which would have
Right.
still net the seller around like 550 if it appraised at the 575. What I can say is I was very upfront with the listing agent in the beginning that we need these closing costs. So I was saying, our appraisals have been coming in pretty fine lately. However, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, so I can't promise what it'll appraise at, but I can promise, we'll do whatever we can to beef it up as much as possible, send in comps, send out a reevaluation of value if we need to, whatever we need to do. I'll try to
Right.
be a good partner with you on this. But we need the closing costs. And they had multiple offers. They held our offer for over a week before they decided. And then ultimately they went with us. And, everything was going great. Then the appraisal came in at 535. And
Oh, man.
obviously, yeah. And so I called the listing agent. I let him know. And there's actually a funny story behind this one, but I let him know. And he's like, okay, well, this definitely changes things. And I'm like, okay, well, I want to remind you, we still need these closing cost credits. So obviously, if it's not something that you think is feasible on your end, there's not much wiggle room that we have either because she needs the money to be able to close. Like we can't make the money poop out of thin air. He says, listen, I don't think that I can make these numbers work for me anymore. The listing agent was actually the seller. Also, didn't disclose that in the beginning, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah, that's another. They're
Neither here nor
supposed to, but they didn't. And you know what? It worked out in our favor anyway. So
exactly. So long story short, actually, this is a funny excerpt to the story. So he's arguing with me about the appraisal. So I call back the lender because he's saying when he talked to the appraiser that the house would have been appraised at 535 before any of the work was done. And I'm like, what? Well, that's different. So let me do some legwork. So we call the lender who calls the appraiser, and that appraiser said he was the one that did that original appraiser for the seller. He did it. And he said that I was sitting with this man at his kitchen table and I told him the value would be 510 after the work was done. I have no idea where he got 535 before work was done. I said 510 after. He's lucky I gave him 535. So, which I
yeah,
told the
we're
guy, I immediately called the listing agent back and I was like, by the way, the appraiser's the same one that you talked to at your kitchen table. And when I say he just immediately agreed to the 535, he's like, listen, I'll do 535, but can she come in with her own closing costs? I'm like, listen,
yeah.
I don't know. I'll call the buyer. I'll get back to you. Buyer says if she has to come in with her own closing costs, yes, we're going to keep it moving. Then he came back and said, listen, I'll do 10K in closing costs, but like that's the most I can do. Call back the buyer. I hopped on a conference call between her, the lender, and her father, broke everything down. Like, listen, at the end of the day, you're going from 575 to 535 and you're still getting $10,000. I think it's a really good compromise that's in your favor. And they ultimately agreed. Listing agent agreed. and we went on with 535 and 10K back for closing costs.
See, and this is where I gotta give you credit. You got creative, right?
Mhm.
You didn't roll over and say, "Yeah, you're not getting the 4% anymore. Tough, we'll walk away." You kinda try to figure out a way to make it work,
Mhm.
right? And then you also took it upon yourself to explain to the client, "Listen, you're still getting 10K, you're still getting a good price on it. You worked it all out." I just gotta say that I think the funniest part is that he sat with the appraiser and completely tried to bullshit you.
Completely, and it was the same appraiser,
Yeah,
and the appraiser said I was specific that 510 when it was done. So the
yeah,
fact that it's 535, I can't see you getting much better than that, and the guy
right.
literally was just he was like, "Okay, sold, whatever, let's do it."
Yeah, because at the end of the day, he's still walking away with 15 grand more than he realistically should have got.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Which it just
All
also
right.
goes to show how small this world is, like, especially the real
Oh,
estate
yeah.
world. It's insane. Neither here
I
nor there.
mean, just the world in general, right? We run into people that like, "Oh, so and so that connects back," and, we've had that with clients too, right? Where we mention a name and they're like, "Oh, I know that person, or I know that person," and we get some fun stories of things that we would not have found out
Yeah,
otherwise, right?
happened with us a
So
couple times.
oh, definitely. So we got through the appraisal issue, right?
Yes.
Continue on.
And
We get
then the
to the
next
quote
issue was we needed to close by February 1st, but before February 1st. And that
before
was the
her.
seller's biggest hang up because and why he wound up just going with us instead of one of the other backup offers that was still there. Because the thing is, and obviously the seller knows this, but I said it to him too. I'm like, listen, you can go with the backup offer, like that's higher at 550 with you're saying a 5K appraisal gap. Realistically speaking, I don't know why you didn't accept that one in the first place, but neither
Right.
here nor there. So you can absolutely do that, but you don't know what's going to happen over the course of that transaction. Anything can happen from beginning to end. So at least at this point, bird in the hand, we can still get closed by the end of the month. I wasn't positive if we can be closed by the end of the month, but I knew we try. And I told him, I was like, listen, I can't promise you it'll happen, but I can promise you that it's all hands on deck for the team. And we did have our clear to close and we were able to close before February 1st. So this past Friday, which was what, January 30th, I think?
30th? Yeah.
Literally, like, right on the line, we had our clear to close, buyer was in the office with you signing, getting everything done. However, the final walkthrough that we had the evening before, there were things that came up, things that, shouldn't have been done, like, the water pressure was basically non-existent in the first floor. We've had impossibly cold weather lately, so we don't know if one has to do with the other or what have you. And then the third floor refrigerator just was not working. Like it wasn't working at all. Like it couldn't be plugged in, nothing was happening. So, yeah, no problem. We'll get this closed on Friday to your satisfaction. However, we do need to work something out regarding these repairs. We're happy to delay closing if you want to get it done, which we really didn't want to do because closing at the end of the month and closing at the beginning of the month are two completely different things for her numbers. But,
Well, for
got to give
both
the
sides.
option.
For both sides. The
Ex-
seller needed to close by the end of the month, and our buyer needed to close by the end of the month, right?
Correct.
And we were smart in the sense here of planning the walkthrough the night before so that we could coordinate. And the nice part, Ariel, is you and your team were in touch with me about the issues, so we were ready to go if we had to raise it. But
Mhm.
it ended up
And we had
working out, right?
discussed as a solution doing an escrow. Like, obviously, I think
Right.
we don't love doing escrows, but that was a solution that we came up with to be able to still get everything closed. The seller didn't, we wanted 2,500 in escrow. The seller said, that's ridiculous. I'll give you 500. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. Why don't you just do the work?
Yeah. Well, and it worked out, right? Because we didn't get wrapped into that conversation, but it worked out because we ended up having to close at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The seller's attorney left early that day, so we couldn't even send them the money. So it worked out in our favor that we were able to basically hold all the money in escrow, let him fix the issues, and close on Monday, right? And
Yep.
that's what it did. Now, it worked out in our favor in the sense of our client didn't want to move in. The situation had been very different had our client wanted to move in on Saturday.
Like if she had a whole U-Haul truck that was packed to the brim and that needed,
Yeah.
oh,
But
yeah.
that's where people need to wrap us in early, right? Telling us if both you and I, hey, I need to be out by the end of the month. Well, we need to
Mhm.
know that because there's delays, there's issues. We would have approached this very differently.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
One of the
That also
one of
actually makes me think of something else that we obviously can talk about another time, another, like, nightmare, but thinking about people having their full U-Haul packed and needing to move. You remember
well,
that one?
I do. So let's transition to that one. But I got a question for you, right? As a closing attorney, a lot of the mistakes we see come up or errors that come up are somebody's confused about the process. Right.
Mhm.
From your perspective, where does a transaction go awry and clients feel like they're off track or lost or confused? What is it that you come across that you could say, okay, this is the clear point where if the client had a better understanding, they could have avoided some of the headache. Is there any point in your mind?
I would say where I feel like there's a really big disconnect with clients and what makes sense to them. A lot of it is around what happens in the event a property doesn't appraise. I feel like that comes up a lot. And I would also say, loan type for things that are required. So, for example, like with FHA or VA, I feel like there can be a disconnect on, why, even in the beginning, like, why can't I offer on this house with my FHA loan? I mean, you can, but, we're going to see some challenges. And then when the challenges arise, okay, well, now whose responsibility is it to do these things? Right.
Right.
And there are different ways we can position them that can benefit both one party more than the other. But at the end of the day, for the loan type, it still needs to be done. So I've seen a lot of confusion around things with that. I also see a lot of confusion around people wanting to know their exact closing cost figures prior to closing. And I think that's a big one. And I always try to preface in the beginning, like I basically have a script. So whenever people tell me I say something I didn't say, I'm like, that's not in my script. So I would never say it.
Exactly.
But I always tell people you'll never know exactly what your closing costs are until sometimes even the morning of closing. Reason being that there's a lot of balancing that needs to take place. All the numbers are preliminary until your buyer's attorney balances with the seller's attorney, and then everyone balances with the lender again. There's a lot of balancing that happens. A lot of things are calculated down to the day, from the prepaid interest, taxes, sometimes insurance, and if there's any oil that's left that has to get reimbursed, or any seller prepaid costs. Like, all of this has to be taken into consideration in order to get your final closing cost figures. And I'll say that like 5 times during a transaction, and I'll still have a client asking me like at the end of every week, so what's my closing costs? And I'm like, oh.
So what we do is we give them a range. National averages are between 2 and 5%. Plan for 5%. You can't go wrong,
And I
right?
usually
I would
tell people
rather,
that, but they always say, I want to know the exact number. And I always
yeah,
say, remember when I said we'll never know the exact number? I mean, we can give you
yeah,
a ballpark, but if you want to know exacts, it's just physically not possible.
right. And I get why they want to know that, right?
Of course.
So, but going back to our friend that had to move out of his house and didn't really update us until it was a little too late, right?
That one was a nightmare.
Yeah. So that one, I think that one, we both can tell this story pretty well, but giving our different perspectives, it was running along perfectly fine. There weren't issues.
We didn't have issues on his end. We didn't have issues on his end. A lot of the challenges
No.
were more on the selling side.
Right.
But I did tell him to not give his landlord notice until, because based off of the situation, I always say don't give your landlord notice until you're clear to close. Like, until we have that clear to close and we know that we're closing, you don't want to do that. And in this position, we also didn't have the clear to close or even loan commitment when he gave notice. And I did
Correct.
advise to not give any notice.
And I don't even think we had the title search done at that point.
Mm-mm.
And I want to
He
say
had
we were
the day we
closing
went
in.
under contract, he gave notice, apparently.
Yeah. Yeah. So one lesson we're going to learn from this is don't give notice until you're clear to close. If you can position yourself where you can not give notice until you're actually closed, it's probably better that way.
Mhm.
But this specific issue we ran into was an issue with the seller bought the property out of a tax foreclosure, and there's certain documentation that needed to get recorded, and unfortunately, it wasn't. Nobody checked on it. Nobody really worried about it, and the seller owned the house for years with no problem, except for now when you go to sell it, we need title insurance, and no one would insure it. So our 30-day close turned into, I think it was like 3 or 4 months.
Yeah, literally, I think over 4 months.
And this is where having somebody partner with you like Ariel, taking you through the process. I'm going to let you just tell about on your end what you did to get us from we're supposed to close in 30 days to we delayed it 4 months, and our client had to be out. I want to say we were supposed to close in October and we closed in like February, and he
Yeah.
was supposed to be out October 3rd.
I don't remember the months, but I do remember he called me because he was going by the closing date on the contracted
Yeah,
closing date, and I always tell people that closing date is a target date. It's not set in stone, it's not, it's not branded anywhere, it's just a target that we're all working towards, and there had been a lot of extensions going through, and he had been signing the extensions too, but he was still, for whatever reason, married to that contracted closing date, which obviously didn't happen. So then he calls me the day before the contracted closing date saying that, hey, I wanted to confirm that we're still closing tomorrow. I have my whole life packed in this U-Haul. And he had 3 kids and one with special needs. And I'm just like, I'm sorry, what? You have what? And he was like, no, like everything is packed. I have the U-Haul packed. Like, I just need to know if I can like get everything over there for closing tomorrow. And I'm like, sir, we are not closing tomorrow. We're actually nowhere near closing. So I
right,
call you in a panic because obviously this is happening. The listing agent wasn't as helpful as I feel like they could have been in this scenario, but ultimately we wound up having to negotiate a rental agreement because the house was also empty as well. The tenants wound up leaving that were there and the house was vacant, but this client has nowhere to go with his family. He needs to be out because his landlord already replaced him and they weren't going to give him any more time there. And his entire
right.
life is in a trip right now. And this is where real problem solving wound up having to come in because holy cow, like what's going to happen. And now, outside of just being a professional, like on a human level, you and I were both just like, how are we going to help this person? Because this is a horrible situation to be in. And we weren't able to work it out overnight. Like he had to work something else out on his end to have a few more days of like a layover or wherever he
Well,
was at.
I think if I recall, it wasn't, we weren't closing at the end of the month. He had time. Like, I want to say it was like the 20th of the month, the 25th. There were still a few days that he didn't have to be out of his place immediately. So we had, I think, that flexibility. The
Yeah. So he
stress
had the
was,
holdover that he had to do for like a few days, but we had to work it
right,
out quickly because he still had to be out.
right. And most of his stuff was inside already a U-Haul, which, you know, I don't think he checked with anyone is part of the
He
problem.
didn't.
He
He
knew he
didn't.
knew his loan wasn't approved. As much as we tell people the closing date is a target, I don't think people always listen to us.
Yeah, they don't. And again, he had signed at least a few extensions to everything. I think it was more of a matter of like signing and not fully understanding.
Right. And this is where you came in to save the day was you reached out to me, you reached out to the listing agent, and I want to say within a week we worked out a rental agreement. It
Mhm.
might have been sooner than that, but we had as soon as we found that out, we had everybody on board. Right.
All
You
hands
were
on
working with
deck.
the listing, right? You're working through the listing agent. I was working through the attorney. We made sure everything was getting done that we could get it done, so that if it came to the first of the month and he was homeless, we at least know we did the best we could.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you
Right.
know what? It wound up working out, right? The house was vacant. The owner got some rent. We got a security deposit that if I recall correctly, we wound up deducting from his total cash to close. I think we did that as well. We got really creative with the way we were going to do the funding because everything on this deal was so tight. Like that was a
Right.
client I was working with for about 3.5 years
Yeah.
before we found the house, like actively working with him for 3.5 years. But because the budget was so tight, it was really challenging to find something. And this was the only thing that worked too. So it was also like, we can't let this go.
And I don't remember what the reason was. Like he was. I remember he was divorced. I don't remember the reason why he couldn't let his kids stay with his ex-wife during that time. There's some issue that was going on with her as well that he had to take care of his kids and have them. He didn't have
So
a
it's
place to put.
because of a special needs child, and the special needs child, one of his like ticks was violence, and he was very
Oh, okay.
violent, and with the siblings, with the ex-wife, he couldn't
Yeah.
go anywhere. So he needed to stay with the dad, but they all needed to stay together, and
Okay.
dad was primary caretaker.
So yeah, the stress was on. I remembering a few sleepless nights during that time, right? Because the last thing you and I want, and I think any real estate professional, we don't want to see our clients homeless, right?
No, oh my god, that's the opposite of what we
Right,
do.
right. So we fought, we pushed, we made it work. At the end, I think we got a good turnout. If I recall correctly, too, we got him a really good deal for paying the further rent. The seller made some money. Our client saved some money on rental, rent cost. It worked out in the end. So from these two closing issues we ran into, what are some lessons we could teach a young new realtor, or maybe not even a young new realtor, but a realtor that has never run into these situations. What's some advice you would give a new person that is learning about from these situations? What can we teach them?
So from the first situation, what I would say is you want to remain transparent throughout the entire process because I was transparent with the listing agent up front that we needed those closing costs. It wasn't a surprise when the appraisal came in low and he was trying to cut back on the closing costs to make and save a little more money, where I'm like, that's just not an option. Right. Like we
Right.
can try to work something out, but we need some closing costs because I was upfront from day one that this was a requirement. And then, in that instance as well, being very communicative with your partners. Because I was communicative with the lender and the lender was in communication with the appraiser regarding all of the issues, we were able to find out that personal relationship with the appraiser and the listing agent and the information that was relayed there that we were able to utilize and essentially use as leverage in
Right.
our negotiating of everything, and then being able to just partner with your partners, like the attorney, for example, in the situation where when we had the issues with the final walkthrough, you were on board. I think that's something that's really important to do is as soon as there's some kind of challenge, loop the attorney in when it comes to the final walkthrough. And I tried to do my final walkthroughs the day before because, at least at that point, we have a fresh idea of the home in our heads, but it gives the sellers enough time to do anything that needs to be done
Right.
on the property potentially as well. In this instance, we would have wound up having to do the escrow, but we may have been able to get it done a little bit more quickly. So that's something that, I think was really impactful that we had the information up front. You were able to know what the next steps would have been. And everyone was on the same page. The communication wasn't choppy. We all knew what was happening and we all knew the impact.
Exactly. Right. And having us all on alerting us to the issues sooner than later makes it a lot easier to work on. Right. Especially because I know there are quite a few attorneys that take Fridays half days. Right. So if we've got an
Fridays are
issue,
always the craziest day.
yeah. But if you think about it, right? If you told me that issue at 3 o'clock on Friday and the attorney's office closed at 12, well, now we have a headache. Versus if you tell me Thursday night that there's an issue, we need now have time to call them first thing in the morning and make it work. Right. Luckily, in that situation, our seller worked it out and it worked out in our favors that the closing was late enough in the day that there were some delays.
Mhm.
Right. So that was that lesson. And then I think the lesson out of the other one, I'm going to steal from you and tell you my perspective is it's all about preparation, right?
Mhm.
And not being scared. For the most part, every problem has a solution, right? As long as nobody dies, there's a way to solve everything, right? Sometimes it
Right.
costs them more money. Sometimes the answer is, listen, this deal doesn't work for you, walk away. There's always a solution to every problem. And that's one of the things that I love about working with you is, and don't take this the wrong way, you don't take no for an answer, right? Because your answer is, all right, no, but let's explore what can we do to get this done, right? I think there's a lot of people that hear no or I'm not willing to budge, and it's done. But there's a
Creative
discussion that can
solutions.
still happen. Exactly. As long as we stay within the law, there's creative solutions for most things,
Yeah, I
right?
mean, honestly, that's why I love working with you. I feel like working with you is really easy because obviously every challenge has a solution. And I feel like I can pick up the phone and call you and we can brainstorm options. Like there are so many times like I've called you and I'm like, all right, this is what we have going on. These are my thoughts. But obviously I'm not the attorney here. So I don't want to just start making any suggestions or
Right.
recommendations until I consult with you first. And you and I have a really great relationship when it comes to brainstorming different opportunities and solutions and coming up with something that can be beneficial for all parties.
And then you and I also have a good enough relationship with the mortgage broker we work with that we can say, all right, the three of us need to get on a call. How do we get this done? What's the solution? What's the problem? What's the solution? And what are our options, right? Because there isn't always a cookie cutter option that works. It's sometimes the three of us need to get together and say, okay, what if we do this? What if we do that? What if we do this?
Yeah.
Right. And most of the time it works out in our client's favors. Sometimes it's been telling our client, you need to walk away. They don't always
And
listen to
sometimes
us.
it's that other story that we were going to talk about that we like ditched last minute where, there's nothing more we could have done.
Right. And the big lesson I think that if you're looking to buy or sell a house, listening to the professionals you work with is key. If you're
Yes.
other agents, the lesson is making sure your clients trust you and listen to you and being prepared for the situations that they're not going to listen to you and you need to figure out how to fix the problems.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
we're going to have to do this again. and we'll talk about some of the other fun situations. Ariel and I work together a lot and have lots of
Yeah.
fun stories.
Well,
Lots. So we don't want to bore everyone today with, a million stories. So we'll have to get you back again. I want to thank you for joining us today. This was a lot of fun. Always a pleasure chatting with you and reminiscing about our fun, crazy stories.
oh yeah.
But the one thing I'll say is, and I'm going to leave with this, even though our stories have been crazy, we typically find solutions to make sure, and we find the right solutions for our clients. We've had deals where both of us have told the client walk away. We've had
Mhm.
deals where we need to fix it to get them to stay in it, as extreme as getting a rental, right?
Yeah.
Putting them into
Yeah.
working it out with this client that we just spoke about. Great. I appreciate you taking the time. I'm sure there will be lots of information. And what I'm going to ask you to share is what's the best way to get in contact with you? If you're somebody that wants to either learn more about real estate and you're looking to get involved in real estate, or you're looking to buy or sell a house, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Say the best way to get in touch with me is via cell phone. I mean, I have it glued to my hand at every moment, even through this whole interview. I've been periodically checking anyway, too. And my best phone number is 203-80910. I can be contacted via call or text. I'm very responsive and, I would love to help anyone that comes through. I also have an Instagram that I'm pretty active on as well, which is Ariel Sells Real Estate. Ariel sells real estate, how you think it would be spelled. And I'm pretty responsive on there as well. And of course, there's the Facebook. You just Google my name, Ariel Adari, I'll pop right up.
And I'll tag you in this and put all your info in the show notes or description. So you're
Outstanding.
looking to buy or sell real estate. Ariel's a good resource. Thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Attorney Kapoor. I appreciate you always.
No problem. Take care.
Take care.